Hello, aspiring developer. So today we're going to be diving into the next phase of determining what software you need. Again, the problem we're trying to solve is how do you determine the right software for your problem? How do you find those pieces of software, especially in the no-code space where there are dozens of softwares and a lot of them kind of do similar things, but not quite so much, right? How do we find that right software? And the way that I approach this problem is similar to how software developers approach just building an app in general. And this approach is called the Model View Controller Framework. Now, the Model View Controller Framework is how you approach designing software in general. So it's generally used on the more micro level. So within an application, you have a view, right? What you can see. And then you might have a controller, and that's generally the logic. Like it's going to transform information. And then you have the model, and that's the data that is being accessed and manipulated by the controller and displayed by the view. So just to give you a visual for you to check this out, drop this down. So this is generally your model view controller. And in the no-code space, we don't necessarily have to worry so much about the model view controller at the micro level. But it's an incredibly powerful tool and very useful for us to look at the more macro level of what are the specific pieces of software I'm going to need, and specifically maybe what are the buckets of need that I have when I'm building a piece of software. Now, we have a front end, and this is the views, right? And then we have a back end, and this is generally going to be our controller and our model. Specifically, the API endpoints. So API stands for Application Programming Interface. And this is basically the bridge that exists between the view, your front end, and your data in your back end. And these API endpoints let you create, update, delete, and read information. It's called CRUD. Right? That's what they call it. It's just CRUD, the CRUD operations. And those are the four things you can do with any piece of data. And these API endpoints let you do that with the data in your backend. And so when we're looking at choosing specific softwares, once we have our problem, solution, result defined, right, we can start to look at, okay, how specifically are we going to fill each of these buckets? Because no matter what your solution is, it's likely there's going to be at least these three buckets. You're going to need to fill each of these three buckets with the no-code softwares. And so we're going to need to either find one software that spans all three of them, like Smart Suite, or we're going to need to find one for each of these buckets. It's also possible that your problem is small enough that you really only care about one of the buckets. So you might be looking at, hey, my problem is specifically, I'm trying to build an automation that decreases the time it takes to do something, right? That eliminates work and waste. And that might be just sitting in this controller, this API endpoint bucket. But for the majority of individuals, I'd say, you're likely going to be touching on all three of these. Even if you're building an automation, you're still working with a model, right? There's still data that you're manipulating. You received a form, like data from a form, and that form is a view that you created for your customer, and they filled that out. And it triggered something in your middleware, your Zapier or Make or something like this. And then it's going to store that data, and it's going to do something with it. Right? So you're always going to have these three fundamental pieces as part of your software solution, right? To create the result that you need. And so looking at each of these three buckets as a need that must be filled, we can start to break the different softwares, the no-code softwares, down into what bucket do they land in. So I kind of did a little bit of that down here with just some applications that I'm aware of, right? I know there's dozens more, and I know that not all of them are here, but Smart Suite is a great example of something that does all three. It's an all-in-one solution. You don't need anything else to make it work. You just plug and play. You can create your database, and then you can create automations, and as you're designing the fields in your Excel spreadsheet inside of Smart Suite, or as they call it, a solution, right? It's automatically querying that information for you using their APIs, and it's displaying it to you, and you can decide how you want to display it. They've got dashboards. You can pull information in, data in, like from multiple places. You can manipulate it in different ways. You can filter it, right? That's the controller layer of like filtering the information that you're pulling in from the back end and then displaying that to the individual. So Smart Suite can do all three of these. Softer is a great example that kind of sits on top of Smart Suite that does, the first two. It's more of a view, but it also accesses Smart Suite in a permissioned way. Then you also have Open Format, which is a tool that you can use to gamify applications. And this is a very specialized tool. And so that's interesting to note as well, is that these applications, or I should say, when they sit in these buckets, there's also just like specialized versions of those buckets. So Open Format is very specialized, meaning they handle the data and the logic for leaderboards, experience, levels, and things like this. And that's highly specialized and highly useful for a select group of people. That might be you, if your software needs that, or if you want to have that there. Flutterflow is very much a view, a front-end application. They do have integrations into tools for the controller and for the model, but Flutterflow itself is very front-end focused. That's their purpose. That's the problem that they solve, and they do it very, very well. So Flutterflow integrates directly with Firebase, and Firebase sits between both of these. It can sit on top of both the model and the controller, or you can just use it as a model, and it's a much less specialized, much more generalized database and controller. My favorite stack personally is this one down here at the bottom, where you've got Flutterflow, it sits at the front, BuildShip sits as your controller, your logic, and then Supabase sits as your backend. And so this is my approach to breaking down the softwares. And in the template that I've provided to you, I actually guide you through this. And there's a series of qualifying questions that I give you for each of these buckets so that you can know, okay, is Smart Suite going to be the best solution for me? Or is Flutterflow or Toddle going to be the better solution for me, right? For each of these buckets, there's going to be qualifying questions that help you know which softwares will not work. And as you eliminate the things that don't work, right, scientific method, if you will, you can start to hone in on the things that will. And once you've started honing in on the things that do work, then you're in a much better place, right? You have less options to choose from. This is one of the reasons why I decided I would limit my work to Flutterflow and Smart Suite. And when I say Flutterflow, I also mean with a back end of Firebase or BuildShip and Supabase. Just because I didn't want to need to repeatedly learn new tools. And so I decided to limit the tools that I use because I know that I can solve 90 to 95% of the problems that may arise with these two tools. This brings me back to perhaps your problem resides in kind of one of these buckets. Let's say that you need to create just an automation that glues your different softwares that you're already using together. Now, in situations like that, I would start to look at just, again, the qualifying questions specifically for that bucket. And then from there, I would start to dive a bit deeper and ask, okay, there are lots of competitors, perhaps in this specific bucket. Let's say Zapier and Make are a great example. You can do a lot of different things with Zapier and Make. Many of them are similar. But some of the integrations of these tools might not be the same between them. And so depending on the integrations of those tools, you're going to change the controller that you're going to use. So Zapier might be integrated with your software, but Make isn't, and so you go with Zapier. Make is, and Zapier isn't, so you go with Make. Right? Just depending on the tools that you're using, the view and the model, your controller will likely change. And this is going to be true in a lot of different places, actually. Many of the view softwares, like Flutterflow, they're directly integrated with Firebase. Like Firebase all the way. They're also directly integrated with Supabase. And so they have these direct integrations, and it makes it very easy for you to use these two tools, potentially, with their software. And Flutterflow is just an example. So all these different no-code softwares, they tend to partner up to fill the needs that they don't fulfill. Right? So Flutterflow partnered up with Firebase and with Supabase to fulfill these two buckets because Flutterflow themselves didn't solve that problem. So it makes sense for them to partner up. And so depending on the software that you're using, it's likely that they're already broadcasting and saying, here are our partners. And my recommendation would be to lean towards using those partners because it just makes sense. If they're publicly advertising, yes, we work with Supabase, then it makes complete sense for you to use Supabase in your application with Flutterflow, just as an example. So again, with this video, I'm sharing with you a template that you can use and also a short training on how to go through this with the qualifying questions that you can ask to break this into what are the specific softwares you need. And then once you have determined what those softwares are, or like eliminated the majority of them, then you can start to take a look at, okay, I know it's between option A and option B. It's not between this vast number of possibilities. So this is the second step to beginning to hone in on exactly the softwares that you can use to build your solution, to create the result that you're looking for.